Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to do a comparison video between a $500 katana and a $150 katana. And these examples that I have in front of me certainly don't cover all of the varieties of swords that you might see out there, but they are very particularly good examples for this video because they effectively look the same on paper. So if you are buying a $500 sword versus a $150 sword, and effectively they look the same on paper, what's the difference? Why would you spend your money on it? What are some of the details that you're paying for? Please elaborate. That's what this video is intended to do, and hopefully it's useful if you're looking at other swords from other brands or across the industry and getting some idea of what you're paying more money for. Now, I can't guarantee that it's going to apply to everything. There's certainly features that are not covered in this video, like folding and lamination and more complex metals. But these swords are relatively similar in spec. They're both made of T10 steel. They're both differentially hardened, and they both come with relatively similar sets of features in terms of the same kind of itomaki, similar types of sayas, and I can explain what some of the differences are, what you're paying a little bit more for. And again, hopefully it's helpful. Now, before I get to the rest of the video, I do want to give a special thanks to Ryansword. These swords were donated by Ryansword specifically for this video. I reached out to them and said, hey, I want to do a comparison between these two things. They gave me two examples, two excellent examples that will help me elaborate on this point. If you think that makes me biased in some way, though, getting swords for free, then you know at the start. But anyway, do know these are Ryanswords. I will link them in the description down below if you're keen on buying one. The other bit to note is that I don't fancy myself an expert in this subject. So I've been talking about swords for 10 years on the internet. I have what you might say is a bit of hands-on experience, and I do Japanese-style swordsmanship, but I don't claim any place of authority in this thing. So hopefully my first-hand experience is enough credential to justify whatever opinion I'm throwing out here, but do take it with a grain of salt. Just know I'm not an expert in these things. But I can go through and show you what I'm talking about. Hopefully that's enough. At the end of the video, hopefully you have some idea if these features are worth your money or not, and you're better educated on, if you see them on different websites, what you might be paying for, and if you want to pay for it, more importantly. So as is customary in my videos, I kind of go soup to nuts, top to bottom, and I'm going to start at the kashira, the end cap, this cap bit right here. And the fittings are the kashira, the fuchi, the menuki are these little kind of medallion pieces that are stuck underneath the wrapping, and then the tsuba right here. So I'm probably saying the names wrong or not Japanesey enough, but that's what I'm going to call them for this video. And more or less the difference between the two, one is nicer. So this is certainly a matter of opinion, but these cost more, I guess I can put it that way. So the fuchi kashira on the base model as well as tsuba are a simple alloyed metal that is painted. The alloy doesn't tend to chip. It's not typically magnetic. I don't know if these are or not, but the material on there sometimes chips. It doesn't really wear away particularly easy over usage, so they're fine. They have a little bit of dimension. It's not a simple shape necessarily, but they have a little bit of casting lines, some minor imperfections. They're painted, they're simple, they're mass-produced, they're not particularly unique or special, but I'll admit, subjectively, I like the look of these more than I do this one, even though this is a little bit more expensive. On the more expensive variety, you have gold detailing and embellishment, so more complex cast to work with that has bedazzlements and a little bit more of a story going on. I believe there's a crane and a floral theme going on here. Now, personally, these particular fittings on the $500 sword are just not to my liking. These gold details here look a little muddy to me, and I think it overall detracts, and I happen to prefer the simpler ones. But if you're spending more money, these might not be my cup of tea, but there are probably other varieties that Ryansword might offer that could be. And you know, if you stick swirly mitsudomes on there, I'd probably be a sucker for it. But the point is that they're a little bit more elaborate, a little more ornate, and they cost more money. The tsuba as well has more detail in it. There's more stuff going on, and so the cost of that material is a little bit more. A huge amount more? No, but it is something that you don't really have the option of changing. Now, you can kind of change the tsuba relatively easily, and you can kind of maybe change the fuchi, but that's risky. But the kashira doesn't really go on without redoing the ito, so changing these is not something that is particularly easy to do. You have to invest in what you want kind of up at the start of the purchase. It's not something that you can change around particularly easily later. The tsuba, though, sometimes you can change relatively or quasi easily. Anyway, cost of the material different. Now, assembly, not so different. If I look at how the knots are tied, the cheaper one is maybe a little softer, not so much. The transitions, they're relatively similar. I can't say that one ledge is really better or worse. Marginally, I guess the more expensive one is just a little bit, but either way, there's a little bit of bunch down here, a little bit of ledge here. Neither one is necessarily perfect. So in terms of how they're affixed, there's not really much difference. The more expensive one appears to be glued. The less expensive one wiggles a little bit down here. This is adhesive that you can put back on done. I can't say that this is something that's abnormal in either case. Do know though that the kashira coming off is a very common thing with Japanese style swords. If you're using it, it loosens up and then it can come off. So getting something, some glue or something under there would be prudent. That said, neither set of ito seems loose enough where it's going to come undone or be of any particular concern immediately. But more expensive fittings, more or less the same level of fitment in terms of quality of assembly and how they're stuck on the actual sword. Which brings us up to the ito here. Now, the first contrast that I'll draw is in the actual material itself. This seems to be a slightly nicer silk, and so if I feel it, it feels more genuine. I guess it feels nicer on the hand. This feels more synthetic. It feels a little slippery on my hand, and even as I run my hand across it, it kind of makes like, as my fingertips hit the knots, it has like a hollow sound to it versus something a little more dense on this one. So the material is different. Probably got real silk here. Probably have some synthetic type material here. So it costs more money, genuine or better material. In terms of tightness, not really much different. They both feel actually effectively tight. Now, I have to grade this on a curve. There are no manufacturers at $500, or at least very few that have swords available that do ito particularly well. This is a common thing that is not exactly at the gold standard coming out of China, but this gets probably an above average score. It can be moved if I push on it, but it's not so loose that I feel like it's going to come undone after a few uses in training, which is important. And if you're concerned about the tightness of ito, spraying it down with lacquer a little bit can tighten things up just a little bit. There's a few remedies on other videos that you can do to tighten it up, but I'd encourage you to keep an eye on that, because if it feels really loose, it can impact your training, and it can also come undone and be a costly thing to repair. It's sometimes cheaper to buy a new sword than to have the ito redone. But better material here. Also, better material on the Sageo panel. So this white panel underneath, I don't know if it's a panel. I believe the higher end one is actually a full wrap, because if I pull this back, I don't see where the panel ends. So it's possible that this one is a full wrap on it, but this one I can definitely see is a panel. In any case, the Sageo, the white stuff underneath, is a organic material. It's a Rayskin material, and it's really coarse, and it's like a rawhide almost in terms of leather. It's not tanned. It's not very pliable. And so if it's wrapped all the way around the handle, well, then it adds to the structural integrity of the handle, and it's more expensive to do, and the actual skin itself has larger nodules. Larger pieces, little larger bulbs on there tend to be more expensive. The $500 sword has larger nodules than the $150 sword, which has relatively small nodules. It might be synthetic as well, but I don't think it is. I think it's real Rayskin. Now, in terms of actual fitment, as I mentioned, tightness, very similar, but as are the diamonds. They kind of wander a little bit on either one. So it's not the $500 one was given to a more competent person to tie it. They seem to be tied by similarly skilled people, because one isn't necessarily tighter than the other, and one isn't more precise than the other. So we move up to the Fuchi. I've already talked about kind of the quality difference between the fitting, but fitment on one is marginally better. There's a little less transition on the $500 one than the $150 one, but not so much that either one would irritate me in training. Tsuba, again, talked about that. Either one is tight, either one is effective, either one is going to do the job that the tsuba is supposed to do, but one is certainly more ornate. As I move up, I'm going to talk briefly about the habaki. So the habaki is this blade collar here, and you'll notice that the $500 sword has a slightly more ornate habaki than the $150 sword. Now, I'd imagine that the $150 sword is really struggling to pack in as many features as possible at as cheap a price as possible, and so it's no surprise that the habaki is one that doesn't come particularly ornate. But these are not very expensive to do differently, so I don't imagine one is much more expensive than the other. But again, no surprise that you're seeing more ornate pieces on the $500 sword than the other. Now, this also came in Shirasaya when I got it. I don't know if the $500 version from Ryansword comes in Shirasaya or not, but they also send this set of fittings along with to put together, and so I'm showing it where I can compare the two side by side, because on the website it's featured in this and doesn't mention anything about Shirasaya, at least not that I read, but it could be there because I'm not very, when it comes to reading, I'm not super attentive. Details about swords, I am, but reading websites, not so much. Anyway, The other bit to note about the habaki is how it fits and rests in the scabbard. And in either case, it's actually pretty good. But you'll notice that this scabbard is a little bit tight. It's binding with the sword somewhere down here. So as we talk about fitment, $500 does not buy you perfection. It is worth noting that no rattle here, even though there's probably a reason for that because it is a little bit too tight. But this one, there's a little bit of rattle. Just about any direction it rattles. Other differences, though, as we talk about the saya, fitment-wise, as I noted, this one's a little tight. This one is actually fit really well, so from a training perspective, it draws and sheathes reasonably well. At least I don't have any complaints out of the box. But the actual scabbards themselves, I could mix and match them between the swords, and they have basically very similar fit and finish levels. I can put this sword and this scabbard and vice versa, but this is the one intended for the $500 sword, and it has some benefits that the other does not. So first, I'm going to start actually at the end here because it's easier. There's a horn piece at the end. This is the kojiri, this little cap at the end. You might not see it, but there's a horn component at the end here. And what does that do? Well, it's a more expensive piece than just paint, and if you're doing any kata or anything where the butt of the scabbard touches the ground, it's less likely to chip and scratch. It still will chip and scratch, it can, but it's a little bit more durable than just paint. So if I set the scabbard down, or if I'm doing any seated kata where the tip of my scabbard might bang into the ground if I move it, then I'm less likely to damage the scabbard, chip it, and have something ugly. Also, if I stand and use it and kind of hold it with the scabbard touching the ground, it's less likely to get scratched and chipped that way as well. If I lean it against something, just more durable, more expensive. The paint on here, not really too much different. I don't think they necessarily cost much difference, but one is a kind of stone washed, more just a satin paint, doesn't show fingerprints. This has a more textured feeling to it, also doesn't show fingerprints, but is a little bit nicer. If we move up to the Sageo, these look the same to me. I don't see any difference between them. But this little nub in the middle is called the krukata, and this rests in your belt, and if you put your hand down and you feel this little nub, you know your sword is pointed the right way, or your scabbard is pointed the right way to put the sword away. And this little nub is made out of horn, and this little nub is made out of wood. What's the difference? Well, one is a nicer material. It looks nicer. That's more or less it. It's more expensive to do it out of horn than wood. Either way, they function effectively the same, but the horn ones are a little more sought after, a little nicer. That horn extends up into the mouth of the scabbard up here. So this mouth is made of horn. This is like a ring of plastic wrapped around, and this horn piece at the mouth area is fitted in a more traditional way, where the wood of the scabbard, the liners kind of run up between the horn, and there's a little bit of horn area up here. Now, why would you want that? Well, the horn doesn't cut particularly easily, and it offers just a little bit of protection from your saya splitting. This plastic ring may offer a similar level of protection. I don't honestly know if one is more effective than the other, but I do know that this is harder to do. Horn is a little harder to fit. It's nicer to see it here. It looks better, and I like that it offers some level of protection. If I do the draw wrong and I'm trying to go too fast, it's less likely to cut into the meat of my hands as it cuts through the scabbard. So that's what that does, and the scabbard is effectively a little bit nicer, has a few more bedazzlements on it. Now I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy, stabby part, and I'm not going to provide much in the way of dimensions or measurements here because, well, I don't know that there's much of a point. They are effectively the same thing. They feel very similar in the hand. They feel very similar in terms of weight. There's not a giant difference between the two in terms of size, but that is more to the point. The blades are both advertised as T10 steel, differentially hardened. Neither one features a bohi. They're approximately the same size. So I've mentioned some better fits or better materials used on the handle. I've mentioned a little better fit on the or better materials on the scabbard, and then a blade that's made of the same thing. So if you're not seeing $500 here, I don't know that I'm going to convince you, but the polish on here is much better. So more or less the polish here is graceful, and it reveals a bunch of characteristics in the differential hardening that you just don't see in the other. It's not that the $150 polish isn't okay. It's a mirror polish. You can still see the hamon. There are details in there for you to admire, and it's a handsome looking sword in its own right. But for the extra money, you get somebody spending a lot of time bringing out the characteristics of this differential hardening, and very gracefully. This is very nice, and it reveals different kind of metallurgy metallurgical effects going on in the differential heat treatment, different areas that, in pockets, I can't remember, there's various names for them in Japanese, but kind of different things heating, different crystalline structures happening. And then as we go up to the Kisaki, it actually looks like it has some attention paid to it. So the Kisaki doesn't look like it's just scratched or sanded the other direction. I don't make out harsh tool marks, and more or less it looks very handsome for a habaki. And it's only really recently that you've been able to buy $500 swords that have polishes like this. Before, this was just not something that you could get in China, but it's only kind of recently started to come out from a few manufacturers. I'm very pleased to see Ryansword offering something like this. The $150 sword is more or less just a mere polish. The lines are still good. Either one is flat. If I hold them up to the light, both of them look relatively clean. But the shinogi is a little crisper on the $500 sword, and it's not just mirror polished with a slight acid bath. So I can make out the hamon in just about any light versus sunlight, and the Kisaki looks a lot nicer. In terms of how do they cut, the same. They both have an edge that's very sharp and effective to do sword-like activities. They both feel good in the hand. None of them rattle or do anything bad. There's not really a functional difference between the two of them. They are both made of the same steel. They're both heat treated in the same way. And I don't know for sure, but I'm going to assume they probably have similar levels of attention to the heat treat. I don't know if that's the case, but if I go and try to smack these on a metal pole in my backyard, which is not what I'm going to do in this video, but if I were to do that, they would both survive approximately the same amount, and any difference that I could equate between them would likely be because of variation in myself or the environment, and not really so much in the swords. So I don't think in terms of build quality, like if you're thinking, oh geez, I don't really care about the polish, little nicer fittings and stuff, I don't care about that. In fact, I even like the look of the $150 sword, because I don't think you're getting an order of magnitude worse sword, but you are getting something less artistically minded and with lesser materials. And if that's enough, then cool, you get all of the kind of same performance benefits and weight and more or less all of the same functionality, but you don't get some features that you don't care about. And if you do, if you start to really see the difference and you say, hey, this polish is amazing, and I really like the extra fittings or the options that exist in those extra more costly fittings, hey, then it's probably worth your $500. To me, the polish on this looks fantastic, and as I'm practicing with it, I happen to really like the look. I like taking it out and admiring the sword and looking at it. The characteristics in the polish, I think, are really welcome, and so the extra money, I know it's not insubstantial. It's it's more than twice the price, but I would rather have one really nice sword like this, or one $500 sword with all of these intricate details, than 2 or 3 of the less expensive swords. At the same time, if you're going to go out and do dumb things in the backyard, then you are likely to go through them, and it may be more prudent to buy, if you have a $500 budget, to buy a couple $150 swords, because one of them is going to get messed up, and you can probably keep one of them in nice condition. Anyway, those are effectively the differences that I can articulate between the two. In practicing EI with either one, they're about the same. I can't tell you that one operates better than the other. They both feel very similar in the hand. I do like the feeling of the genuine silk here, but the tightness of the ito and general shape, they feel very, very, very similar in the hand. In terms of cutting, they both come sharp. I only cut pool noodles and the like, so effectively they both pop pool noodles apart, and they seem similar. If I took them to tatami or did a more thorough review, it's possible there would be subtle differences between them, but functionally, just kind of basic cutting, I'm not spotting anything out of the box. And edge bevels and all of that kind of stuff look very, very similar to me. They have a similar level of sharpness. Anyway, I think that's about all I can really cover here with you, and so hopefully it has been helpful. The idea here, again, was to explain some of the differences between these two swords and what you're paying for. I certainly see the extra money in this sword. I understand why it costs so much more money. If you do, then hopefully you understand why your $500 is well spent. If you don't, and you say, oh, that's not for me, I don't care about any of it, hopefully you save yourself some money not paying for features that you don't care about. Either way, I think you're going to get a sword that you're probably going to like, and hopefully this helped you find the right one. Anyway, that's all I got. Again, special thanks to Ryansword for sending these my way. It's much appreciated. Hopefully it was a useful video. Cheers, and thanks for watching.